I will ruin you for other men. Sierra should have known better, but she didn't. Now, hours later, her life is crumbling. The man she once trusted has become her greatest threat. You think you can betray me and get away with it? You'll never find peace again. But that night, nothing could prepare her for what she'd have to do next. Let me back up to the moment everything changed. It was supposed to be a night like any other. But when the past came knocking, so did the secrets she'd buried deep inside. She always kept her guard up. Until tonight. That's when he walked in. Mason. Are you feeling the tension yet? Don't miss what happens next. Hit subscribe so you're the first to know how this intense story unfolds. And hey, comment below. Let me know where you're watching from, and if you've ever felt betrayed like Sierra. Trust me, this is just the beginning. Sierra should have stayed away from Mason. She knew it, but instead, she gave in. And now, hours later, everything she had built, her marriage, her family, her future, was slipping away like sand through her fingers. Victor's words still echoed in her mind. I will ruin you for other men. She had never seen him like this. The anger, the hate. It was as if the man she married had completely disappeared, replaced by a stranger with a vendetta. His betrayal cut deeper than anything she had ever felt. He had been her world, her protector, and now he was her enemy. And for what? A single moment of weakness? A reckless choice? Sierra rubbed her temples, her head spinning. She needed space. She needed air. But every time she tried to breathe, it felt like the walls were closing in. She had always been the responsible one, the one who kept everything in line. People depended on her, Victor, her family, her business. But that night, she had let go, and in doing so, she had shattered everything she had worked so hard to protect. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. It was Mason. She stared at the screen, a mix of guilt and longing swelling in her chest. She couldn't bring herself to pick it up, not yet. Not when the world she thought she knew was falling apart. Victor had found out. She didn't know how, but he knew. The way he had looked at her when he walked into the room, his eyes full of venom, told her everything. This wasn't just about her affair. No, this was personal. Victor wasn't just angry. He was vengeful. And now, he was making sure she would never forget what she had done. Sierra thought about leaving. Walking away, escaping the toxic grip of her marriage. But where would she go? What would she have left? She had made a decision that night, and it had cost her everything. And now, she had to live with the consequences. But in the back of her mind, there was one question that refused to go away. What was Mason really after? Was he here to help her escape, or was he another player in a game she couldn't even begin to understand? The phone buzzed again. Sierra took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. She was no longer the woman she had been. The woman who put everyone else's needs before her own. She had crossed a line. And now, there was no going back. As she reached for the phone, the weight of her choices pressed down on her, and she couldn't help but wonder if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. But the screen lit up with Mason's name, and she knew, deep down, there was no turning back now. I'll see you tonight, the message read. The decision had already been made. Sierra stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection, as if the woman looking back at her was someone she didn't recognize. The lines of stress were visible around her eyes, the weight of the night before hanging heavy on her shoulders. She touched her face, feeling the coldness of the skin beneath her fingertips. How had she let herself fall this far? She could still feel the warmth of Mason's touch, his lips on hers, his hands pulling her close like they were the only two people left in the world. The kiss had been electric, dangerous, full of everything she had been craving yet never allowed herself to pursue. And now, in the harsh light of day, she was haunted by it. But the guilt? That would come later. Right now, she had a choice to make. She turned away from the mirror and glanced around the penthouse. Her life, as lavish and perfect as it seemed, was empty, cold. The gold and marble, the expensive paintings on the walls, none of it mattered. The life she had built with Victor felt like a prison. But leaving him wasn't as simple as walking away. There was too much at stake. Too many people who depended on the facade of their perfect marriage. The phone buzzed again. Mason's name flashed across the screen, and her heart skipped a beat. She hesitated, fingers hovering over the screen. She should ignore it, put it aside, pretend it never happened. But she couldn't. With a quick swipe, she opened the message. "Meet me at the bar in 30 minutes. You know the place." She read the words over and over again, feeling a pull she couldn't deny. Her mind screamed at her to stay away, to fix the mess she had already made. But her body, her heart, they craved the chaos, the uncertainty, the excitement that came with being reckless. Sierra walked to the closet, her fingers brushing over the expensive fabrics of her dresses, all carefully chosen for public appearances. The thought of another night of perfection, of pretending to be the woman Victor wanted her to be, made her stomach turn. She grabbed a sleek black dress, the one she had worn when they first met, when everything still felt alive. It wasn't about impressing Victor anymore. It was about reclaiming something, her own freedom. The phone buzzed again. "I can't stop thinking about you." Her breath hitched in her throat. The words were simple, but they were enough to shatter whatever resolve she had left. She put the phone down and pulled the dress over her head. She didn't have to think about what would come next. She already knew. The choices were made. The door was already open. Victor wouldn't understand. He never would. He didn't want her. He wanted a trophy. A wife who would smile for the cameras, stand by his side while he crushed everyone who stood in his way. She was just another asset to him, and she had let him make her feel small for far too long. The taxi ride to the bar was quiet, but every minute felt like an eternity. She could feel the weight of her choices pressing down on her chest, but there was something exhilarating about it. For the first time in years, she wasn't just playing her role. She was taking control. The bar was exactly how she remembered it, dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of smoke and whiskey. She pushed open the door and stepped inside, her heels clicking sharply on the wooden floor. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for him. And then she saw him. Mason, sitting at the far end of the bar, looking as out of place as she felt. His gaze met hers, and for a moment, the world around her disappeared. He smiled, that same crooked smile that always made her heart race. But this time, there was something different in his eyes, something darker, a warning. "You came," he said, his voice low and smooth. Sierra nodded, feeling the heat rise in her cheeks. She didn't know why she was here, why she had followed him. But as she took the seat beside him, it all seemed irrelevant. "I never thought you'd actually show up," Mason continued, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass. "I thought you had too much to lose." Sierra met his gaze, her pulse quickening. "I've already lost everything," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Mason's smile deepened. "Maybe, but not everything." His hand moved across the bar, resting gently over hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let herself feel the electricity between them, the rush of emotions she had buried for so long. This was the moment. The choice was made. There was no going back. Sierra turned her hand, lacing her fingers through his. It was reckless, dangerous, everything she had tried to avoid. But in that moment, it was exactly what she needed. "So, what now?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. Mason leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. "Now, we start a new game." And Sierra, despite every voice telling her to stop, couldn't help but lean in closer. The morning light filtered through the thick curtains, casting a dull glow over the penthouse. Sierra woke to the feeling of emptiness. Her head throbbed with the remnants of last night's decisions, and for a moment, she almost wished she hadn't woken up at all. She stayed still in bed, the sheets tangled around her body, unwilling to face the truth of what she had done. She glanced at the clock, already late. The day would wait for no one, and neither would Victor. But the knot in her stomach refused to let her forget. The memory of Mason's touch still lingered on her skin, his voice in her ear, his hand holding hers in a way that made her feel seen, for the first time in years. And yet, all of it, every second, had been wrong. She swung her legs off the bed and stood, the cool floor beneath her feet grounding her. Her reflection in the full-length mirror mocked her, showing a woman who looked put together but felt completely broken. Her eyes were bloodshot, and there were faint traces of the night's makeup still clinging to her skin. She didn't look like the woman she thought she was. She looked like someone who had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. The phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Victor. "Where are you? We need to talk." The text was curt, cold, but she could feel the simmering anger behind the words. He knew. And this time, it wasn't just about what she had done. It was about what he was going to do in retaliation. Sierra rubbed her face, trying to banish the rising panic in her chest. There was no way around it now. The confrontation was inevitable. She grabbed her phone and typed a quick reply, forcing herself to stay calm, even though every part of her wanted to scream. "I'll be downstairs in 10 minutes. We'll talk then." The moment she hit send, she felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She had to face him. She had to look him in the eyes and explain. What, exactly? What could she possibly say that would make this all right? Her mind raced, but the thoughts swirled around her, without any real clarity. She didn't know what she was supposed to do now. What was left to save? She quickly showered, the cold water a temporary distraction, but it did nothing to shake the weight of the truth pressing down on her. There was no going back from this, no apology that could fix it, no words that could undo the betrayal, the choices she had made. She dried off and pulled on the first outfit she found, something neutral, something that would hide the storm inside her. She didn't have time to think about what she was wearing. She just needed to leave the room before she broke down. As she descended the staircase, her heart raced. The door to the study was open, and through the cracked door, she could see Victor standing by his desk, looking out the window. His broad shoulders were tense, his back rigid. She could already feel the heat of his anger, even before he turned to face her. Sierra walked into the room, her footsteps deliberately slow, the weight of the situation pressing down on her with each step. Victor didn't turn around right away. He just stared out the window, his jaw clenched. "Victor," she said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain calm. "We need to talk." He turned then, his face unreadable. But his eyes, they were filled with something dark. Betrayal, resentment, and, underneath it all, a deep, seething anger. "You think this is a joke?" he asked, his voice cold, flat. "You think you can do whatever you want, and I won't notice?" Sierra's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to explain herself, but the words felt like they were lodged in her throat. "You've crossed a line, Sierra," Victor continued, taking a step toward her. "Do you know what that means? What that does to someone?" Sierra opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She knew what he was saying was true. She had crossed a line. She had destroyed everything, all in a single night of reckless abandon. But the guilt, the weight of what she had done, was suffocating. "I don't know what you want me to say, Victor," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never meant for any of this to happen." Victor's lips twisted into a bitter smile. "You never meant for it to happen? Then why did you go to him?" His voice was rising now, the anger evident in every word. "You think Mason is going to fix this? You think he's the answer?" Sierra flinched, the mention of Mason making her heart race. She didn't know how to explain the pull she felt, the way he made her feel alive in a way that Victor never had. But that wasn't what mattered now. What mattered was that she had betrayed the man she had promised to love, for better or worse. And nothing could change that. "I don't want him," she said, her voice shaking. "I want this to stop. I don't know. I just want it to stop." Victor stared at her for a long moment, his eyes hardening, the muscles in his jaw clenching. "You think you're the only one hurting here?" His voice was sharp, cutting. "You think this doesn't affect me? Do you know what I had to go through to make sure this life, our life, was perfect?" Sierra's breath caught in her throat. "Victor, please. You don't get it, do you?" He interrupted, stepping closer. "You think you can walk away from this? That I'll just forget it? No, Sierra. You've made your choice, and now, I'm going to make mine." Sierra's heart pounded in her chest. She had no idea what he was about to do, but the weight of his words hit her like a slap to the face. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was about power, control, and she had just handed him everything he needed to destroy her. Victor's gaze was unrelenting, and for a moment, Sierra wondered if she was going to lose everything. Her marriage, her career, her future. Nothing seemed safe anymore. But as he turned away, his back to her again, he said one last thing. "You'll regret this. I promise you that." And just like that, Sierra knew the game had changed. The stakes had never been higher. The days after the confrontation were a blur. Sierra moved through her life in a daze, barely registering the passing hours. Each moment felt like a ticking clock, counting down to something inevitable, something she couldn't avoid. Victor's words echoed in her mind, replaying in an endless loop. "You'll regret this." She had hoped, naively, that maybe he'd calm down, that maybe the anger would pass, but instead, it had only grown. Every interaction with him was colder than the last. Every look he gave her was filled with venom, like she was the enemy. She could feel the distance widening between them, the chasm of betrayal so deep that it seemed impossible to cross. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Mason. "We need to talk. Meet me at the usual place." Her heart skipped a beat. The pull was there again, that dangerous temptation to throw caution to the wind, to see him and feel something, anything, that wasn't the suffocating weight of guilt and shame. But deep down, she knew she couldn't keep running from the mess she had made. Still, she couldn't bring herself to delete the message. Instead, she put the phone down, rubbing her temples. It felt like she was on the edge of a precipice. One wrong move, and everything would come crashing down. She couldn't talk to Victor. Not now. He wouldn't listen. He hadn't been listening for months. And what would she say to him anyway? How could she explain that she had made a mistake that night? That it wasn't about Mason or anyone else, but about her needing to feel alive again? Sierra sighed and walked toward the window, the city's skyline sprawling before her like a never-ending maze. She had everything, or at least, she used to think she did. The life, the wealth, the prestige. But now, it all felt hollow, empty. The guilt clawed at her, but beneath that guilt was something else. A hunger. A need to reclaim what she had lost. She had let Victor control her life for too long, dictating every decision, every action. It had been her choice to give him that power, and it had been her mistake. And Mason? He was the escape, the break from the chains she had wrapped around herself, the man who made her feel like she mattered, like she existed outside of the role she had played in Victor's life. But she knew it couldn't last. Nothing with Mason ever did. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. Sierra's stomach twisted. She knew who it was before she even opened it. Victor stood there, his expression unreadable. The tension in the room was palpable, suffocating. He wasn't the man she had married anymore. The anger had taken over completely, leaving nothing but the cold, calculating shell of a man who no longer cared for her. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice tight. Sierra nodded, stepping aside to let him in. She didn't want to hear it, didn't want to hear the venomous words he would surely spit. But she had no choice. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. Victor paced the room, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You think this is just something that can be swept under the rug? That you can go out and do whatever you want, and everything will just go back to normal?" His voice was sharp, edged with frustration. Sierra opened her mouth to speak, but he cut her off. "No, Sierra, it doesn't work like that. You've embarrassed me. You've humiliated me in front of our family, our friends, and I won't stand for it. You want to destroy everything we built?" His eyes narrowed, his gaze hardening. "If that's what you want, fine, but it won't be on your terms." Sierra's heart raced. She didn't know what he meant. What was he planning? The fear clawed at her throat, but she fought it down. She wouldn't show him weakness. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Victor," she said, her voice steady, though her insides were in turmoil. "But I can't keep pretending. I'm suffocating in this life we've built. I need more than just being your wife. I need more than being perfect." Victor's face contorted with anger. "Perfect!" he spat, taking a step toward her. "You think I wanted you to be perfect? I wanted loyalty. I wanted respect. But now, I don't know what I want. Maybe I was wrong about you. About everything." His words felt like a slap, each one landing harder than the last. She wanted to scream, to tell him the truth, tell him that she was lost, that she was fighting to find herself. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she stood there, frozen. Her breath shallow as Victor's words cut deeper into her than she could have imagined. She didn't recognize him anymore. This wasn't the man she had fallen in love with. This was someone different. Someone twisted by power, by control, and now by his need for revenge. "I'm not the same woman I was when I married you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't pretend to be." Victor's eyes flickered, a moment of something like regret passing through them. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "I gave you everything," he said, his voice quieter now, but still full of contempt. "And this is what you repay me with?" Sierra wanted to say something, wanted to tell him that she never asked for everything, that she had only wanted a fraction of the life they had. But she knew it would never matter. Not now. Not when the walls were so high between them. Victor turned to leave, but paused at the door. "You'll regret this. I'll make sure of it." Sierra's heart hammered in her chest. She had already regretted it. She had already crossed a line that could never be undone. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving Sierra standing alone, her heart racing in her chest. The room felt smaller, colder. And outside, the city continued to move forward, oblivious to the destruction unfolding within the walls of her home. She was trapped, and she didn't know how to escape. The house felt emptier than ever. The silence after Victor's departure was suffocating, pressing down on Sierra's chest like a weight she couldn't shake. She walked through the empty halls, her footsteps echoing, each one reminding her of the life she was losing. Slowly, painfully. She had hoped that the confrontation would bring clarity, that it would finally set things right, but instead, it left her feeling more uncertain than ever. What was left for her? Was there any chance of redemption, of reclaiming the life she had once dreamed of? Her phone buzzed again, the same name flashing on the screen. Mason. Sierra's stomach turned. Part of her wanted to ignore it, shut out the world and hide from everything. But the other part of her, the part that still longed for escape, knew she couldn't. She answered, her voice soft, shaky. "Mason? Are you okay?" His voice, calm and steady, cut through her uncertainty. But there was something in the way he said it, something protective that made her want to lean into him, to let him take control of the chaos swirling in her mind. "I don't know," she whispered. Stepping into the study, her gaze drifting to the desk where Victor had been standing just moments ago. The same desk where the destruction of her marriage had begun. She swallowed hard, pushing the thought aside. "Everything's falling apart." "I know. I can feel it." There was a pause, and for a moment, Sierra could hear the sound of a car passing in the background, the steady hum of traffic, the world outside still turning. "Listen, Sierra, I need you to hear me. You're not alone in this." Her heart fluttered at his words. It felt almost too good to be true. Someone who cared, someone who saw her for who she really was, not just as a wife, not just as a trophy in Victor's world. But she couldn't trust it, couldn't trust him, not entirely. "I can't keep doing this," she said, her voice breaking. "Victor, he'll never forgive me. He's going to make sure I pay for this. Everything I've worked for, everything I thought I had, is slipping away. And I can't stop it." "I told you, you're not alone in this," Mason repeated, his tone firm. "But there's something you need to know, something I found out." Sierra's pulse quickened. What could he possibly have found? She didn't want to hear it, didn't want another layer of complexity added to her already broken life. But she was already too far gone. She needed to know. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's a reason Victor's been so cold. Why he's acting like this. It's not just about you. He's been hiding something, and I don't think it's just about the affair." Sierra froze. Her heart slammed in her chest. What was Mason talking about? She had already been consumed by the betrayal. She couldn't even process another layer of deceit. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely audible. Mason hesitated, and the seconds stretched into an eternity. Victor's been involved in something illegal, and I think you're caught in the middle of it. Her mind raced as she struggled to comprehend what Mason was saying. Illegal? What was he talking about? How could she possibly be caught in something so dark, so dangerous? I don't understand. What's Victor involved in? She asked, her voice shaking. I can't say much over the phone, Mason replied, his voice low. But I'll explain everything when I see you. You need to be careful. What's happening between you and Victor is bigger than just a marriage falling apart. This goes deeper than you think. Sierra's hands trembled as she clutched the phone. She felt like the walls around her were closing in even tighter, suffocating her. She wanted to trust Mason, but this was too much. How do I know you're telling the truth? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mason's voice softened. You don't, but I need you to believe me, Sierra. Whatever happens next, you can't trust anyone except me. The words hit her like a punch. She didn't want to believe it, didn't want to think that her world was even more tangled than she could imagine. But as she stood there, in the middle of her empty home, she realized that she was already in too deep. There was no way out. I'll meet you, she said, her voice firm despite the storm raging inside her. Where? Same place as before, he said, his tone soft but insistent. I'll be waiting. The line went silent, and Sierra lowered her phone. Staring at it in disbelief, everything had just shifted. What was once a simple affair had turned into something much darker. She had never asked for any of this, never wanted to be part of a conspiracy. But here she was, entangled in something that was spiraling out of her control. Sierra walked over to the window, looking out at the skyline, the city bustling below, unaware of the storm brewing in her life. The weight of everything, Victor's betrayal, Mason's revelations, her own actions, pressed down on her chest. She was no longer just fighting for her marriage. She was fighting for her survival. And as she stood there, staring at the city lights, she knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. Sierra stood in front of the mirror, her fingers fumbling as she adjusted the collar of her jacket. The reflection staring back at her felt like a stranger, someone caught in the storm of her own making. Her mind raced with 1,000 questions, but there was only one answer she could focus on: meeting Mason. She had no choice, not anymore. She was in too deep, and the truth was the only thing that could save her, or destroy her. The city outside the penthouse window seemed distant, indifferent. The glass was cold against her palm as she stared out, wondering how much longer she could keep pretending that everything was fine. She had lied to herself for so long, but now the lies felt unbearable. Victor's cold treatment was no longer just about the affair. The deeper Mason's revelations went, the clearer it became. Victor had been hiding something dangerous. The question wasn't whether she could fix her marriage. It was whether she could survive the mess she had walked into. Her phone buzzed again, and Sierra almost didn't want to look. She had learned to expect nothing good from Victor's messages, but the moment she saw Mason's name flash across the screen, her heart skipped a beat. I'm here. Don't keep me waiting. Sierra swallowed hard, her chest tightening. She had always hated the feeling of being caught between two worlds, one with Victor, full of security, obligation, and cold control, and the other with Mason, a tempting escape that promised freedom, but also danger. What was she supposed to do when both worlds were equally broken? Her pulse quickened as she grabbed her coat and hurried out the door. The elevator ride down felt like an eternity, each floor descending a little further into the chaos. When the doors opened, she stepped into the lobby, barely noticing the doorman's greeting as she rushed toward the door. The night air hit her like a slap to the face as she stepped outside. It was colder than she had expected, and she pulled her coat tighter around herself. The street was alive with the sound of traffic, but everything around her felt hollow, like she was walking through a dream. The bar Mason had chosen was only a few blocks away, a dive hidden between high-rise buildings. not the kind of place one would expect a billionaire to frequent. When she walked inside, the low hum of conversation and clinking glasses felt like a world away from the tension she had left behind in the penthouse. The lights were dim, casting long shadows across the worn leather booths. Mason was already sitting at the far end of the bar, his back to her, an empty glass in front of him. He looked the same as she remembered, calm, controlled, but there was something in his posture that told her he was waiting for something more than just a casual meeting. She approached him slowly, her heart pounding with each step. When he heard her footsteps, he turned, that familiar crooked smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You came." His voice was low, almost teasing. Sierra hesitated, standing just out of reach. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but it wasn't this. For a moment, the man she had been before everything happened, the one who would have run into Mason's arms without a second thought, seemed so distant, like a version of herself locked away in a past she couldn't reclaim. "I had to," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what else to do." Mason studied her for a moment, his eyes searching her face. "You don't have to do anything, Sierra. You never did. But you've walked into something you can't walk out of without consequences. You understand that, right?" Sierra's stomach clenched. She sat down beside him, her fingers gripping the edge of her glass as she avoided his gaze. She didn't want to hear it. Didn't want to hear that she had already crossed a line that she couldn't return from. "I don't know if I can do this," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "I don't know what's real anymore. I thought I could fix things with Victor, but now I'm just lost." Mason leaned forward, his expression serious for the first time that night. "Sierra, it's not about fixing things with him. It never was. You've been running from the truth for so long that you didn't see it. Victor's playing a much bigger game than you realize, and you're in the middle of it." Her breath caught in her throat. "What are you talking about? What game?" Mason's eyes darkened. "Victor has been using you. You think he loves you? You think this marriage is about love? It's not. It never was. It's about power, and you're his pawn." Sierra's mind reeled. She had suspected it deep down, but hearing it out loud, hearing Mason say the words she had refused to acknowledge, was a shock. It was like a veil had been pulled from her eyes, revealing the truth she'd been blind to for years. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That's not true. He wouldn't do that." Mason's face softened slightly, but there was no sympathy in his eyes. "Victor doesn't love you, Sierra. He never did. He's been using you to climb higher, to make himself untouchable. Everything you thought was real, everything you thought was yours, it's all part of his plan. He's been manipulating you." Sierra felt like the ground beneath her feet had disappeared. She wanted to deny it. She wanted to scream at Mason that he was wrong, that he didn't understand, but deep down, she knew he was telling the truth. Every decision Victor had ever made had been about control, and now she was the one paying the price. I can't believe this," Sierra whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know who to trust anymore." Mason's hand reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers gently. "You can trust me, Sierra. I won't let him destroy you, but you have to make a choice. You can't keep running, and you can't stay where you are. You need to take control of your life." The weight of his words hit her like a freight train. She had never thought of herself as a victim, but in that moment, she felt like one. Trapped. Alone. And now, facing the choice Mason was giving her, she had never felt more lost. "Tell me what to do," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Mason smiled softly, but there was no joy in it. "You already know what to do. You just have to decide if you're ready to face the consequences of it." Sierra closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision ahead of her. And as the minutes ticked by in the quiet bar, she realized that her life was about to change. The question was, would it be for better or for worse? The choice was hers, and for the first time in years, she felt like she was finally in control. The night felt too quiet, too still. Sierra hadn't realized how much she'd been holding her breath until she found herself sitting in the dimly lit bar, her hands trembling slightly, staring down at her untouched drink. Mason's words hung in the air like a dense fog, suffocating her with their weight. You can't stay where you are. You need to take control of your life. But how? How could she possibly take control when everything she thought she knew about her life was crumbling around her? Victor's betrayal was just the surface. Mason's revelation had opened a door she wasn't sure she was ready to walk through. Mason's gaze was fixed on her, waiting. There was no judgment in his eyes, only patience. He wasn't pushing her, not yet. He was letting her take her time. But she could feel the clock ticking, each second dragging her closer to a decision she wasn't ready to make. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered, finally breaking the silence. Her voice felt foreign, weak. She sounded like someone who had already given up. Mason leaned forward, his eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her heart race. Sierra, you've already done it. You just don't realize it yet. Sierra swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath. I've already crossed a line I can't come back from. Victor, he'll never forgive me. And I don't even know if I want him to. But I can't keep living like this. I feel lost. Mason's expression softened, and for the first time, there was a vulnerability in his gaze. You don't have to keep running, Sierra. And you don't have to keep pretending to be someone you're not for him or anyone else. You're not the problem here. Victor is. He's been manipulating you, using you. And you've been too blind to see it. Sierra flinched at his words. She knew they were true. Deep down, she had known for a long time, but hearing them out loud made the truth feel too heavy to carry. Her mind flashed back to the years of trying to be perfect for Victor, to fit into the mold he had created for her. The life they had was a lie, a facade built on control and manipulation. I've been so stupid, Sierra whispered, her voice breaking. I thought if I just played my part, everything would be okay. But it never was it? I was never really living. I was just existing. Mason's hand reached across the table, brushing hers gently. The simple touch sent a jolt of electricity through her, stirring something deep inside her that she had tried to bury for so long. She wanted to pull away, but instead, she found herself leaning into it, allowing herself to feel something other than fear and guilt. Sierra, Mason said softly, his voice low and soothing. You've been trapped in a world that isn't yours. And now, you're at a crossroads. You can't stay with Victor. Not like this. And you can't keep running from what you really want. You have to choose. You have to choose who you want to be. His words settled over her like a blanket, warm and comforting but also suffocating. The pressure of the decision weighed heavily on her chest. She had spent so many years letting others dictate her life. Victor, her family, society's expectations. But Mason was right. This was her life, and she had to take control of it. But what about Victor? Sierra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What do I do with him? How do I just walk away from everything we've built? Mason's eyes darkened, and his hand tightened around hers. Victor is part of the game. He's not the prize. He's just another pawn. You've been manipulated for too long, and now it's time for you to break free. He will try to destroy you, Sierra, but you don't have to let him. Sierra's chest tightened as the weight of his words sank in. But I'm not like you, Mason. I can't just walk away and leave everything behind. I have responsibilities. I have a family, a business. I can't. You can, Mason interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. You just have to be willing to risk everything to save yourself. This isn't just about Victor. This is about you. Your future. Your happiness. The silence between them stretched, and Sierra felt as if the world had stopped moving. The decision was bigger than just leaving Victor. It was bigger than anything she had ever faced. It was about changing the course of her life forever. She looked down at their hands, intertwined on the table. For a moment, she wished she could close her eyes and make everything disappear. Wished that she could go back to a time when she didn't have to make such impossible choices. But she knew, deep down, that wasn't possible. The life she had known was over. And now, she had to decide who she wanted to become. Can I really do this? She whispered, more to herself than to Mason. Mason didn't hesitate. Yes, you can. Sierra closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She didn't know what was coming next, but for the first time in years, she felt like she had the power to choose. She wasn't just a victim of her circumstances. She wasn't trapped anymore. She opened her eyes and looked at Mason, her heart racing with uncertainty, but also a spark of something new, something she hadn't felt in years. I'm ready, she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. I'm ready to take control of my life. Mason smiled, a real smile this time. Then let's make it happen. Sierra felt a weight lift from her shoulders, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was drowning. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened next, she would face it on her own terms, and that was a freedom she hadn't known she could have. The night stretched on as Mason and Sierra talked, planning their next steps in a world that seemed both terrifying and liberating. But as the hours passed, Sierra realized something. She had already made the most important choice of her life, and no matter what came next, she would never be the same again. Victor's hold over her was slipping, and for the first time in years, Sierra was beginning to feel like she was finally living. The next few days blurred together, the weight of Sierra's decisions settling into her bones like a storm on the horizon. She had taken the first step towards freedom, but the path ahead was murky, filled with unknowns. Mason's words echoed in her mind, urging her to trust herself, but the fear of what might happen next lingered in the background, waiting to pounce. She hadn't seen Victor since the confrontation. He was avoiding her, cold, distant, like a stranger she no longer recognized. And that, in a twisted way, was a relief. It meant he was retreating, preparing for the battle he had vowed to fight. But Sierra knew the war was far from over. Mason had promised to help her navigate this new life, but the reality of it was sinking in. Sierra was about to face a new kind of battle. The battle for her own identity, for a life she didn't even know she wanted until now. She stared at the phone in her hands, her fingers trembling as she held it up. The message on the screen was from Mason. Meet me at the usual place. Her heart pounded. He had been distant these last few days, and she knew it was only a matter of time before the past. Victor, her marriage, everything, caught up with them. But she couldn't keep hiding from it. She couldn't keep running. With a deep breath, she stood, walking toward the door. She was tired of feeling like a passenger in her own life. It was time to take the wheel. The bar was nearly empty when she arrived, the soft hum of conversation from a few patrons barely filling the air. Sierra scanned the room, her eyes locking onto Mason, who sat at the far end of the bar. He was watching her, his gaze unwavering, intense. She could tell that something had shifted in him too. Her heart beat faster as she walked towards him, every step making the ground beneath her feel less certain. The decision she had made, the one to walk away from Victor, to break free from a life she had built out of duty rather than desire, was already changing her. But she didn't know what was on the other side of it, and that uncertainty gnawed at her. Mason stood as she approached, his presence commanding in a way that made her pulse quicken. His smile was softer this time, like he understood how hard this was for her. Sit, he said, his voice low but reassuring. We need to talk. Sierra sat across from him, feeling the weight of his gaze as he studied her, searching for something, perhaps trying to read her thoughts. What's going on? She asked, her voice steady but betraying the anxiety she felt. Mason leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. Victor isn't just angry with you, Sierra. He's terrified. The power he's had over you, over your life, is slipping away. And the closer you get to freedom, the harder he's going to fight. Sierra swallowed hard, her throat tight with a combination of fear and something else, relief. It was true. She could feel the shift happening. Victor's power was crumbling, but that didn't mean it was over. It meant it was going to get worse before it got better. I don't care what he does anymore, Sierra said, her voice firm, though a small tremble still caught in her words. I'm done with him. Mason nodded, but there was a flicker of concern in his eyes. You need to be careful, though. Victor won't give up easily. If you're really going to break free, you're going to need a plan. and you can't do it alone. Sierra looked at him, uncertainty clouding her mind. She didn't want to admit it, but he was right. As much as she hated to rely on anyone, Mason was the only one who understood the stakes. "What's the plan?" she asked, her voice low. Mason took a deep breath, his hand resting on the table, fingers tapping lightly as he gathered his thoughts. "Victor's already on his way to discredit you. He'll use everything he has, your family, your business. He's going to try and make it seem like you're the one who's been controlling everything, the one who's been manipulating him. He'll turn the narrative against you." Sierra's chest tightened. She knew Victor would do anything to maintain control. He had always been a master at manipulation, but to use her as the scapegoat? To twist the story into something that painted her as the villain? It was almost too much to bear. "Why didn't I see it sooner?" she whispered, the realization hitting her like a tidal wave. "Why didn't I see that he was using me all along?" "You were never meant to see it," Mason replied quietly, his gaze softening. "Victor's been playing a game you didn't even know you were in. But that's about to change." Sierra leaned back in her chair, the weight of his words settling heavily on her. She had been living in the dark, trapped by the expectations of her marriage, her family, her role. It was like she had been a pawn in a game she never even knew she was playing. "So, what do I do now?" she asked, her voice hoarse with the weight of the question. "How do I fight back?" Mason's eyes sharpened, the intensity in them sending a jolt through her. "You take control, you stop running, and you go after Victor. Not just for yourself, but for everyone he's hurt. You don't let him win." Sierra's heart beat louder in her chest as she took in his words. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about something bigger, about breaking free from a life that had been constructed on lies and manipulation. It was about reclaiming her future, her identity, and finding the strength to face whatever Victor would throw at her. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady now, filled with a determination she hadn't felt in years. "Let's do this." Mason leaned back, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. "Good, because it's not going to be easy. But you've got everything you need to win." Sierra nodded, feeling a fire ignite inside her. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt like a warrior. And this was only the beginning. As the conversation continued, Mason outlined the steps Sierra would need to take, laying out a plan that would help her tear down the walls Victor had built around her. But Sierra knew that no matter what came next, the hardest part was over. She had made her choice. And now, nothing could stop her. The days after her meeting with Mason were a whirlwind of planning and decision-making. Sierra felt like she was living in a fog, her mind constantly racing, caught between the realization that she was finally taking control of her life and the fear that everything could fall apart if she wasn't careful. Victor was already starting to play his hand. There were whispers in the office, phone calls that didn't seem to end, and Victor's presence at the family business events became more frequent, more watchful. Sierra could feel the eyes on her, the subtle shift in the way people treated her. It was as though the rug had been pulled from beneath her, and now she was exposed, vulnerable. But the truth, the ugly truth, was that she had never truly been in control of her life. Not when it came to Victor. He had orchestrated every aspect of their marriage, their business dealings, even their family's public image. Sierra had been nothing more than a pawn in his game. She was no longer willing to let him keep playing with her life. The meeting with Mason had been a turning point. For the first time, she had seen a path forward, a way to fight back. But Mason's words haunted her. "Victor won't give up easily. He'll try to discredit you, twist everything into a story that makes you the villain." And already, she could feel it happening. That night, after a long day of dealing with the increasing tension in her office, Sierra sat alone in the penthouse, staring at her phone. She had avoided contact with Victor since their last confrontation. He hadn't reached out either, which made her wonder just how far he had already gone to manipulate the narrative. How much damage had he done? Her phone buzzed again, the sudden vibration startling her. She glanced down at the screen. A message from Mason. "We need to talk, now." Her heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just a casual meeting. The urgency in his words made her uneasy. She stood up, grabbed her coat, and quickly left the penthouse. The air outside was colder than it had been the night before, but Sierra barely noticed as she hurried through the streets toward the meeting place Mason had set, an old, discreet cafe nestled in the back of a quiet alley. It was a place they had met before, but this time, the feeling was different. She wasn't just meeting Mason for a drink anymore. She was meeting him to uncover the truth that would bring Victor down. When she arrived, Mason was already there, his expression unreadable. He was leaning against the wall outside, his arms crossed, waiting for her. His gaze was sharp, calculating, as if he were waiting for something. "Sierra," he said, his voice low but urgent. "We don't have much time." She nodded, the knot in her stomach tightening. "What's going on, Mason? What did you find?" Mason pushed himself off the wall, taking a step closer. "Victor's not just manipulating you. He's been running an entire operation behind the scenes. Money laundering, illegal investments, and he's been using the family business as a cover for his dealings." Sierra's mind reeled as she processed his words. "Money laundering?" she echoed, feeling a rush of disbelief. "Are you serious?" Mason nodded. "I've got the evidence. I've been digging into his accounts, following the money trail, and it's all pointing back to him. Everything he's done, every choice he's made, it's been to protect his empire. And you, Sierra, you've been caught in the crossfire." Sierra's chest tightened. The weight of Mason's revelation hit her like a punch to the gut. She had always known that Victor wasn't a saint, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. She had been married to a man who had been living a double life, and she had been too blind to see it. "So, what do we do with this?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with fear. "How do we stop him?" Mason's eyes softened, but his resolve was clear. "We expose him. We go public with the evidence. We make sure the world knows what he's been doing. But it's not just about bringing Victor down. It's about you. About reclaiming your life." Sierra's stomach churned at the thought. Exposing Victor meant tearing apart everything they had built. Their marriage, their business, everything. And there was no going back once she made that choice. But what other choice did she have? Stay silent and allow him to continue his reign of manipulation, or fight back and risk everything? "You have to decide," Mason continued. "You can't keep living in this cage. If you expose him, you'll have the power to change everything. But it's not going to be easy. It'll cost you. It'll cost everything." Sierra took a deep breath, her mind racing. But as she stood there, feeling the weight of the decision settle in her chest, she knew she couldn't keep running from the truth. She had been manipulated for too long, and it was time to make her move. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm. "Let's do it. Let's expose him." Mason nodded. "Good. We'll do this carefully, one step at a time. But once the ball is rolling, there's no stopping it." As they sat down to go over the plan, Sierra felt a surge of power she hadn't felt in years. The walls that had once held her captive were beginning to crumble. The game was changing, and she was finally in control. But as they discussed the next steps, Sierra couldn't shake the feeling that Victor was already several steps ahead. He was ruthless, and if he found out what she was planning, nothing would stop him from destroying her. She had no idea what was coming next, but she was done being a pawn. She was done being controlled. And whatever came next, she would face it head on. The days that followed felt like a slow-motion descent into chaos. Every moment Sierra spent in the penthouse with Victor, the tension between them grew thicker. His eyes, cold and calculating, followed her every move as if he were waiting for her to slip up. The silence between them was deafening, a constant reminder that things would never be the same. Victor wasn't just angry anymore. He was a man on a mission, and Sierra could feel the weight of his determination pressing down on her. He had to know that she was onto him. How could he not? The cracks in their marriage were wide open, and there was no pretending otherwise. She kept her distance, both physically and emotionally, choosing to focus on the next steps, on the plan she and Mason had started putting together. It wasn't just about exposing Victor anymore. It was about protecting herself, protecting her future. Mason had been right. This was her fight now, and she couldn't afford to hesitate, but she wasn't ready for what came next. Sierra was at her desk one afternoon when she received a call that made her blood run cold. The number was unlisted, but something in her gut told her it was bad news. "Hello?" she answered, her voice steady despite the rising panic in her chest. A male voice on the other end spoke quickly, urgently. "Sierra, listen to me. You don't know me, but I've been following Victor's accounts for the last 6 months. He's been laundering money through a shell company that's directly connected to your family's business. If you keep pushing this, you're not just risking your marriage, you're risking everything. Your family, your business, your freedom. You need to stop before it's too late." The words hit her like a slap to the face. The sound of her pulse pounding in her ears drowned out everything else. She had known Victor was dangerous, but she hadn't realized the full extent of it. He wasn't just controlling her. He was manipulating everything around her, tying her to his lies in ways she hadn't even begun to understand. "Who is this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Who are you?" The voice on the other end didn't answer immediately. There was a long pause before he spoke again, quieter this time. "I can't tell you that, but I can tell you this. If you keep digging, if you keep pushing for the truth, there's no way out. Victor won't just destroy you. He'll destroy everything you've ever known." The line went dead before she could respond. Sierra sat frozen in her chair, the phone still pressed to her ear as the words echoed in her mind. "He'll destroy everything you've ever known." It wasn't a warning. It was a promise. She dropped the phone onto the desk, her hands trembling. The message was clear. Victor wasn't just some man who could be intimidated. He had resources, connections. And if Sierra kept going down this path, there would be no turning back. But the fear gnawing at her didn't stop her. It only made her more determined. Mason had been right. She had already crossed the line, and there was no way to unmake her choice. It wasn't just about exposing Victor anymore. It was about survival. Sierra stood up, her mind racing. She had to act fast. If Victor knew someone was onto him, he'd be planning his next move. And if that someone was her, she was already in deeper than she'd realized. The next few days passed in a blur, each moment feeling like a countdown to the inevitable confrontation. Sierra kept her interactions with Victor minimal, knowing that every word she said could be twisted, every gesture could be used against her. She was walking a tightrope, and any misstep could send her crashing to the ground. Victor's presence in the penthouse was suffocating. Every time she entered a room, he was there, watching, waiting. He was playing the waiting game, like a predator waiting for his prey to make a mistake. And Sierra had no doubt that if she made even the smallest misstep, he would pounce. But she wasn't the same woman anymore. The fear was still there, buried deep, but it wasn't the driving force anymore. The desire to take control, to protect what was hers, was louder than the fear. It was time to confront Victor. Sierra waited until the evening when Victor had finished his business calls, when the penthouse was quieter, the tension in the air palpable. She didn't know how she was going to do it, but she knew she had to. Victor was sitting in his favorite chair, his eyes fixed on the documents spread across the coffee table in front of him. He didn't look up when she entered the room. He never did, not unless he wanted to. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. Victor glanced up briefly, his eyes narrowing. "We've already talked enough. Haven't you made enough of a mess?" Sierra squared her shoulders, trying to ignore the cold chill that ran down her spine. This wasn't about apologies or making excuses. This was about taking back what was hers. "I know what you've been doing," she said, her voice firm, though the words felt like daggers in her throat. "I know about the money laundering. I know what you've been hiding from me." Victor's expression didn't change, but there was a shift in his eyes, something dark and calculating. "You don't know anything," he said, his voice low, almost too calm. "You think you can just walk in here and accuse me of things without proof?" Sierra didn't flinch. "I don't need proof. You've already made it clear who you are. I'm done pretending I don't see it." Victor stood slowly, his towering presence intimidating. You don't know what you're dealing with, Sierra. You never have. You think you can take control, but you can't. I've been patient with you, but now you're pushing too far. If you think you're going to get away with this, you're mistaken. Sierra held her ground. I don't need to get away with anything, Victor. I just need to stop being your pawn. Victor's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. You're already too far gone, Sierra. You have no idea what you've unleashed. And when this is over, you'll regret ever crossing me. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them was thick with tension, like a match hovering over a barrel of gasoline. Sierra could feel the weight of the decision she had made, the stakes growing higher with every word. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She was done being controlled, and she wasn't going to back down. As Victor turned away, his voice cutting through the silence one last time, Sierra knew one thing for certain. The game had changed, and she was no longer playing by his rules. Victor's words hung in the air long after he had left the room, still ringing in Sierra's ears like an unresolved chord. You'll regret crossing me. You have no idea what you've unleashed. Her breath came in shallow bursts, her mind racing with everything she had just set in motion. There was no turning back now. The man she had married, her protector, her provider, was no longer just a husband. He was a dangerous adversary, and she had just thrown down the gauntlet. Sierra stood still in the center of the penthouse, her hands trembling as she tried to process what had just happened. Every step she had taken had led her here, to a point where her life, her entire existence, was about to be irrevocably altered. Mason's words echoed in her mind. If you're really going to break free, you need a plan. You can't do it alone. The weight of that truth settled over her like a cold wave. She couldn't keep fighting alone. She needed help, someone who could help her fight back against the monster Victor had become. She had already chosen her path, but the consequences of her decision were more daunting than she could have imagined. Her phone buzzed again, and this time, it was a text from Mason. We need to meet. It's time. The simple message sent a jolt of anxiety through her chest. This was it. The moment when she would either stand tall or fall. And as she read the words again, she realized something. She had never been more terrified in her life. But she wasn't going to let fear dictate her choices any longer. She had already lost so much. Her peace, her sense of control, her marriage. But she still had one thing left. Herself. And she wasn't going to let Victor strip that away too. The cafe where Mason was waiting was dimly lit, tucked in a quiet corner of the city, the air heavy with the smell of freshly brewed coffee and old wood. Sierra felt a tightness in her chest as she stepped inside, the familiar warmth of the space doing nothing to calm her nerves. Mason was already there, sitting at a corner table, his gaze fixed on the door as though he knew she was coming. When she approached, his eyes softened, and he motioned for her to sit. You're here, he said simply, his tone filled with understanding. Sierra nodded, her eyes scanning the room before settling on him. You were right, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor's not just a man I've been married to. He's a monster. And now, I don't know what to do. Mason leaned forward, his expression serious. The first step is understanding what you're up against. You've already taken the hardest step, Sierra. You've decided to fight. Now we need to figure out how. Sierra's mind raced as she tried to steady her breath. I've done nothing but run from the truth my whole life. I've been so blinded by this image of who I thought I should be. The perfect wife, the perfect business partner. I never even realized I was suffocating until now. She clenched her fists, her knuckles white. And now I've pushed him too far. He'll destroy me if I don't stop him. Mason shook his head, his voice calm. You're not going to let him destroy you. We're going to take this one step at a time. You have to trust yourself. You've already made the hardest choice. The rest of it is just executing the plan. Sierra looked up at him, her mind grappling with the enormity of what they were about to do. And what happens after we expose Victor? What's left for me? For us. Mason's gaze softened, and he placed his hand over hers on the table. What's left is freedom, and the truth. You'll have your life back. A life you can finally live on your own terms. Sierra met his gaze, feeling the warmth of his words settle in her chest. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of something better, something real. "What's the plan?" she asked, her voice steady. Mason smiled, a flicker of determination in his eyes. "We start by digging deeper. We gather the evidence, the real stuff, Victor's hidden accounts, the people he's been working with, and then we go public. We hit him where it hurts, his reputation, his business. We make sure the world knows exactly who he is." Sierra nodded, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on her shoulders. "And after that?" "What happens after we expose him?" "Then we make sure he can never hurt you again," Mason replied, his voice filled with certainty. "We go after everything he's built and tear it down. You can't just take down a man like Victor in one fell swoop. You have to destroy his empire first, piece by piece." Sierra sat back, her heart racing as the enormity of the task ahead hit her. She had never been one to back down from a challenge, but this was unlike anything she had ever faced. She was going up against the man she had once called her husband, the man who had controlled her life for so long. And yet, for the first time in years, Sierra didn't feel like a victim. She felt like a fighter. The plan was risky, dangerous even, but it was the only option left. And Sierra was done running. Mason's words echoed in Sierra's mind as she left the cafe that night, the weight of their conversation sinking in. The plan was in motion. There was no turning back now. She had made her choice, and no matter what came next, she was ready. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and careful planning. Mason had arranged everything: the legal angles, the connections, the evidence. Sierra had done her part too, working quietly behind the scenes, gathering what she could and preparing for the moment when she would finally expose Victor for the man he truly was. And then, the day arrived. The moment that would change everything. Sierra stood in front of her laptop, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The email was ready. The evidence was ready. All she had to do was press send. Her heart raced as she clicked the button. The email was out. The world would know. The moment Victor had been dreading, the moment he had worked so hard to prevent, was finally here. Sierra's life was no longer in Victor's hands. It was in hers. And for the first time in a long time, she felt free. The following days felt like a surreal blur. The world outside Sierra's apartment continued to spin. Business deals, headlines, meetings. Yet inside, everything had shifted. The weight of the decision she had made hung heavy on her. But there was no turning back now. Victor had tried to fight back. The moment the email went out, the world began to unravel. The press caught wind of the scandal. The business empire he had carefully crafted was beginning to fracture. Investors pulled out. Employees started to quit. And the once solid foundation of his wealth began to crumble. Sierra hadn't been prepared for just how quickly things would escalate. She had expected resistance, but not this level of chaos. There were calls from lawyers, threats from anonymous sources, and Victor's own cold, angry messages flooding her phone. But the more they came, the stronger Sierra became. She had done what she knew she had to do, no matter the consequences. And now that the truth was out, she could breathe a little easier. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't the woman who had been controlled by fear, by Victor's demands. She was a woman who had taken her life back. The hardest part, however, was yet to come. Victor's face appeared in every news outlet, his name plastered across the front pages in scathing headlines. He fought with every ounce of his power to salvage what was left of his reputation. But Sierra knew the truth. The public facade he had spent so many years building was shattered, and there was no way he could rebuild it. Sierra sat in her office one afternoon, watching the headlines flash across the screen. The familiar numbness she had once felt when looking at her life, the cold, sterile existence she had built, had faded. It was replaced now with a sense of clarity. She had fought for this moment, for this sense of peace, and it was hers. The past couldn't hold her anymore. The phone buzzed on her desk. It was a call from Mason. Are you okay? His voice was steady, but there was an underlying concern in it that made Sierra smile despite the heaviness of the situation. I'm fine, she said, her voice calm but stronger than it had been in months. Better than I've been in a long time, actually. There was a pause on the other end. We did it. It's over. For you, at least. Sierra's smile faded slightly. Is it really over? Or is it just beginning? It's over for now, Mason said. But Victor isn't the type to go down quietly. Expect him to fight back. But that's not your concern anymore. I know, Sierra replied, her voice firmer now. I've lost everything I thought mattered, but I've gained something I didn't even realize I was missing. Control. The ability to choose. My future is in my hands now. I'm not going to let him take that from me. She stood up, walking toward the large window of her office, gazing out at the city below. For the first time in a long time, the view didn't feel like a cage. It felt like opportunity. It felt like freedom. Mason's voice pulled her back from her thoughts. You don't have to face this alone, you know. We've been through too much together to walk away now. Sierra took a deep breath, the weight of his words sinking in. She wasn't alone. And for the first time in years, she was ready to let herself lean on someone. I know, she said softly, smiling to herself. Thank you. It had been months since the storm had settled. The legal battles, the media frenzy, the pressure from all sides, it had all started to feel like a distant memory. Victor's name was still attached to the scandal, but he had faded from the public eye, his empire all but destroyed. The fallout had been inevitable, and though it had cost Sierra everything she had known, she realized that sometimes, you have to lose it all to gain everything. Mason had kept his promise. He helped her navigate through the murky waters, offering guidance when she needed it most, but never pushing. And through it all, Sierra had learned how to trust again, both in herself and in the people who had shown up for her when everything seemed lost. One day, sitting in her office, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Mason, nor was it a threat from Victor's camp. It was a call from her lawyer. Good news, Sierra. Her lawyer's voice came through, sounding both relieved and optimistic. The settlement has gone through. The business is officially yours. No more ties to Victor. No more strings attached. Sierra felt the weight of the words settle into her chest, but this time, it wasn't with dread. It was with pride. She had reclaimed everything that mattered. She hung up the phone and stood, walking to the window once again. The city stretched out in front of her, and for the first time she saw it with new eyes. This was her world now, her future. Victor had been right about one thing. Nothing was ever easy. But now, Sierra had control, and no matter what happened next, she would be ready. This was her life, her choice, and nothing would ever take that from her again. As she stood there, the city buzzing beneath her, Sierra realized something. She wasn't just rebuilding her life. She was starting over. And this time she would do it on her own terms. The past was behind her. And the future? It was wide open.